Hey, what's up, everyone? Welcome back to Behind the Series. It's me, Pastor Mike from Time of Grace, once again with Amber, Albee, Swenson. Amber, how are you today?
I'm doing all right. How are you?
I'm outstanding.
Good.
We're recording this kind of at the cusp of leaving 2024 and starting a new year 2025. So I'm not sure if you or your family is into Spotify at all, but my girls like go wild and crazy with excitement when the Spotify Wraps come out. Do you know about that?
Yeah, I sure do.
Like wrapping up the year, who'd you listen
Yep.
to? Who are your top? So give me like the Amber Albee Swenson 2024 wrap. What were the highlights? What were the big moments? What
So I did
song did you
I
listen
did
to the most?
not get a wrap because I did not listen to Spotify at all this year. I did all YouTube, but I can assure you that it was Brandon Lake and Phil Wickham, and probably Lion would have been pretty close to the top,
Nice.
and then a whole bunch of Christmas music in the
Yes.
last like 4 months. So
Yes. You're the one who told me about the new Phil Wickham Christmas album, and
yeah,
we are addicted in our house. I think we get through it at
so good.
least the whole album once a night.
Yep,
Yeah.
so good.
Oh, how about apart
So
from
what
the
about
music?
you? What were yours?
I don't know if I wanna reveal my, playlist listening habits here as we're recording. I got
Well,
I had such like a mostly Christian music, and then my daughter started playing like jazz piano, so we had that. Then I totally had like a throwback season where like 90s hard rock, like Limp Bizkit. I was trying to teach my girls how we used to just like get mad and aggressive to get our aggression out when we were in high school. Um, so yeah, I think everything, all the things.
it's okay. You are right in midlife crisis mode, so next year will probably be better.
I'm trying to picture Amber at a Limp Bizkit concert, just like in the mosh pit, pushing people around and getting jacked up.
I was all alternative back then.
Oh,
Pearl
okay.
Jam, Soul
Yes.
Asylum,
Yes.
yeah, that kind of stuff.
This is awesome. Hey,
Yeah.
if there's a place that you can put a comment on this video, we'd love to hear what you were doing in the mid to late 1990s. All right, but moving on from that, we're launching into a new year, and we got a brand new sermon series to kick it off, and the series is
Yeah.
called Reset.
Yeah.
So, a series I had a chance to preach here at our local church. So, just three messages for this one, so short and sweet, and I'm excited to dig into it with you today.
Yeah. So what's the big idea?
Oh, I don't know about you. I don't know about the people who are listening, but I love. I know it can be forced, but I love how the new year pushes me to kind of think about everything in my life.
Mm,
I don't know that in like late July, I think about my marriage habits or my financial habits or how I'm treating my body or my prayer life. I know I feel kind of stuck in the middle of a busy year, but every time the calendar turns over and I get like a fresh planner, it's kind of that chance to like reset. Okay, where am I at right now? What's going well? What can I praise God for? And what can I change? And so the
mhm.
series is kind of about the three big areas: the priorities we have in life, the purpose we have in life, and the place, kind of like the gifting that God has given us and where we fit in the year to come. So I want to explore those three areas, give everyone the chance to push the reset button, and hopefully have a great new year.
Those are super important topics.
Mm.
So the first message was to set your priorities. So reset to set your priorities and talk about the great command.
Oh yeah. In the Old Testament, I think I have this data right. God gave 613 separate do's and don'ts. And in Matthew 22, it says that one day a teacher of the law came to Jesus and said, "Okay, Jesus, you know the list. What's the most important?" So we can't memorize all these or focus on all. What's the priority? And Jesus has that classic answer. The most important of the whole list is to love God with your whole heart, soul, mind, and strength. And so I was thinking about that. Out of all the things that we could do with our savings or our debt or our
Mhm.
friendships or our marriages, like none of that matters more than seeking God first, his kingdom, his truth, his love, his forgiveness, his son. So I think making God a joyful priority is the most important thing you could do in the new year to come.
Nice. How should Christians prioritize their life? So when you give them a list,
Hmm.
what does that look like?
Oh man. Yeah, how do they prioritize? When you sent me that question via email, I just wrote the word carefully. Like this is the question. if you're a Christian, of course you love God.
Yeah.
No one's going to say, well, no, 2025 just isn't the year when I'm going to love Jesus.
Right.
I think what happens though is if we don't intentionally give God like the rock in the jar,
Mhm.
that all our intentions to have a great spiritual year will kind of get pushed out by other things. Actually, Kim and I, my wife, had this amazing conversation yesterday. So we're recording this just before Christmas. We're just a few days out. And I said to
Mhm.
Kim, I think this is the best I've ever felt at Christmas. And Kim said, yeah, I just feel like on top of things and prepared and the priorities are right. And I asked her, well, what happened? How did this happen?
Well, clearly Phil Wickham. I
Yeah,
mean, that
clearly.
has to be in there.
All right, next question. Everyone else. Watch how Amber gets every question back to a Phil Wickham reference. This is, yes.
We're concentrating on peas. Phil Wickham goes right in with it. So anyway, sorry, go ahead. What was the
Kim had a big change in her career that she stepped back
Yes.
from, 50 plus hours of teaching to kind of a part-time role.
Mhm.
And we just kind of noticed like we couldn't do all the things. We couldn't have a peaceful Christmas and me working this many hours and she working this many hours and volunteering here and hosting a life group. Like it's so obvious to say out loud, but we were bound and constrained by time, space, and energy.
Mhm.
And so even though we always wanted to have a great Christmas focused on the reason for the season,
Yeah.
the busyness of all the stuff we were trying to do pushed our good intentions out. And I think that's just something I'm learning the hard way as I go through life, that I overestimate how much I can do.
Mhm.
And there's a real cost to that overestimation, is that the things that I actually do care the most about end up getting pushed to the side or only getting a little bit of my time and energy.
So true. And I think we get so caught up, and maybe I shouldn't generalize, but it seems that we get really caught up in trying to get the riches and we miss the truest riches.
Hmm. Yes.
We think that we all have to work X amount of hours to get X amount of money because that's where, we're going to get the best. If we're both working this many hours, then we're getting this much money and clearly that's going to be the best.
Hmm.
And yet that comes at the expense of time with your family and more time in the word and more
Yeah.
time to volunteer and more time with your friends. And I have found over the years, my time with my friends is just like the greatest gift. They just help me stay stable. And
Hmm. Yeah.
when I give up on those things, you are frazzled and just
Yeah.
you miss it. You miss so much.
Yeah. Yeah. That's so true. Was it Dallas Willard, that big spiritual voice, who said there's that book written about him, The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry,
Mm,
that there is no shortcut to Christ-likeness besides ruthlessly eliminating that pressure of, I always got to go 90 miles an hour because there's not time to get this done. And it might sound pedant or very basic in this message, where make God your priority, but it's actually an incredibly difficult calling to look yourself in the mirror and be honest, to say, I'm not just going to add one more thing to this new year and think somehow I can do it.
yeah.
Well, the last holidays were wild, but I'm just going to do these 5 more things this year and it's
Yeah.
going to be better. Like, no, no, it will not. And so, yeah, maybe that's the challenge. If you're listening, if God's going to be a priority, it's probably less adding spiritual things to your life. Although maybe you could use some more Bible study or church attendance, but it's probably the hard, honest work of saying, I might need to step back from some pretty good and worthy causes, so my soul has the time and space to meditate on God's word, to actually show up at church instead of 7 minutes late and rushing out the door because I got like, your soul needs that space to thrive and really receive the love that God's speaking to in the gospel. So
Mhm.
you have Amber's permission. You can say, you can disappoint someone. You can say no.
No one
Um,
needs my permission. They're all saying, well,
sure.
how good that does.
Yeah, it's a hard lesson, but it's an important one for sure.
So I had a really big decision that I had to make recently, and I counted on a bunch of my trusted friends. I was talking with them and going back and forth for a month or so, and finally contacted Pastor Shupi, who reviews our podcasts and our stuff. And I was just I was throwing some stuff out. What do you think about this versus this? And he sent me back a reminder about what my priorities were. And he said, Amber, first is Jesus, and then your spouse, and then your children, and then your employment, and then your local church, and then your government community, and then yourself.
Mm,
And that was super. I mean, when I received his email, the decision was made because it laid it out like
mm,
when you make your decisions, whatever your decisions are, make sure that Jesus is first, and then your spouse, and then your children,
mm,
and then your job.
mm, mm,
And the local church is after that.
mm.
And then, so I found that very, very helpful.
Yeah, wow. Just having a guide to figure it out instead of having these 15 things that kind of all jump out of order so quickly.
Mhm.
He's a wise man. Pastor Shupi,
Yeah.
we know that you're going to listen to this to make sure we didn't say anything unbiblical, but we like you. You get my daughter would say about Pastor Ed Shupi, 10 out of 10 would recommend.
I would totally agree. He has become one of my trusted advisors who I don't know why, he's the first person I should have gone to, and then the decision would have been made instead of me wrestling with it for a month and
That's
talking to all my friends and stuff. But
wow. That's all
all
good.
right, you talk about changing priorities, and as you already said, that can be so incredibly difficult to
Mhm,
actually it's one thing to say it or even to recognize it, so that you're, like, hurried and it's
mhm,
crazy, but to actually say, "No, we're gonna step back and do this," is crazy, can be
mhm,
hard. How can Jesus' example help us to get our priorities in order?
mm. Yeah, let me answer that in two parts. I think if the goal is to be like Jesus, and if that's a noble thought, that Jesus was so comfortable disappointing people that he gives you permission to do it. Um, Jesus served and loved people like no one's ever loved, and then he stepped away and he just took some time for himself. He spent quantity time in prayer,
Mhm.
and the disciples would say, "Where Jesus, where have you been? Everyone is looking for you." And he doesn't say, "What? Oh, I'm so sorry. This is very selfish of me." Like he is not bothered by the fact that people wanted his attention, but he had blocked out that time to spend with his father. So I think if unless you think Jesus is a bad example, just reading those passages does give you kind of emotional. I'm not a bad Christian if I'm
Mhm.
behaving like Christ. Then the second thing I would say is not just his example, but I think his approval is so important in this because I mean, as much as Pastor Shupi's first this, then that, if you're the person that gets said no to because of that list of priorities, you can be pretty moody about it.
Yeah.
So maybe your pastor did want you to volunteer for something and
Mhm.
he's going to be like, oh, seriously? Or your friends did want you to show up, or your boss would have loved it if you would have said yes to the extra. So we need to prepare our hearts for the disappointment of people. And I think to survive those moments and not just become people pleasers, we have to come back to the fact that Jesus is pleased with us.
Mhm.
So that gospel reminder of, okay, these people might be frustrated, they might not understand, but Jesus understands and he is for me and he's with me. And assuming I'm not being lazy and just like saying no because I don't want to do hard work,
Yeah.
then I have his thumbs up and approval, which can help me just take a deep breath and rest in the decision that I've made.
Mhm. Very nice. That's helpful. Sermon number 2 is reset to discover your purpose. What is the Great Commission?
Yeah. So in this message, we're talking about the one of the biggest purposes, the purpose that Jesus gave all Christians was to preach the gospel to all creation. So some people call the Great Commission what Jesus said in Matthew 28, Mark 16, Luke 24, and Acts 1. And I'll share those really quickly. He said in Matthew 28, go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing and teaching them. Mark 16, preach the good news, the gospel to all creation. Luke 24, repentance and forgiveness of sins should be preached to all nations. And then Acts 1, you'll be my witnesses in Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, and to the very ends of the earth. So, this idea that God just hasn't called us to do good work or be good neighbors or be faithful friends, He's called us to share what we've received, the goodness of our sins forgiven, with other people that God puts into our path. So, that's the big purpose that every Christian has been given.
So, what are the biggest setbacks to people sharing their faith?
Ooh. Let me flip this on you. I got this question from you, and I just wrote You? Question mark. So
I
I'm not
agree.
sure what letter grade you would give to your own evangelistic efforts. What holds you back? What gets in the way? So you kind of think about your life as a Christian. What's been
Mhm,
the moments you said, "Oh, I should have spoken, but
mhm.
this stopped me from doing so."
So I was doing a podcast yesterday. I was a guest, with a organization that serves people from birth to death, and so they had asked me to talk about elder care.
Mm,
And while I worked as a private elderly companion for 6 years and then at a nursing home for 2 years. And I learned pretty quickly that if I didn't talk to people about Jesus, they might not be there the next day. And it was a terrible, terrible feeling
mm,
to walk into the nursing home and realize someone was gone who didn't seem to have much of a relationship with Jesus. And I always thought I'd get around to it. I waited for the right moment. When would
mhm,
the conversation come up? Um, but I realized pretty quickly exactly what you said. I was the biggest obstacle to sharing my faith. And there, when you realize that time is short, because most people don't work in a nursing home. So you think you're going to have time with your neighbor whenever,
mm,
or your coworker whenever. But when I was put in that environment, I became bold very quickly and I didn't waste opportunities because you didn't know if you'd get another one.
mm. That's interesting. So are you saying that everyone who is listening right now, every person they see today, they should grab them by the shoulders because they might not get a second chance because they might have a heart attack and just give them Jesus?
It wouldn't be the worst thing you ever did. If you I mean, I think there's such a thing as, doing it in a way that's crazy and, nobody's gonna listen, but there are ways to insert if somebody's having a bad day, "Can I pray for you?" My girls really are big into, thanking people and say, "Have a blessed day." And, I think we talk about the things that matter to us.
Mm,
So,
mm,
I think finding a way to talk about it is pretty important.
mm. Yeah. Yeah, I think there's a tension here, in my opinion, that I think in Colossians 4, I'm praying that God would open a door for the message that
Mhm.
sometimes with certain people, if I'm trying to get Jesus in there, it's like their door isn't open and
Yep.
I keep knocking on it until they get like frustrated and annoyed.
Mhm.
So I too see the value in like patiently loving and
Mhm.
I think of that passage in First Peter about, hey wives, if your husband doesn't believe, there's a way to win him over without words.
Right.
So instead of forcing more Jesus in there, sometimes it's about the action that maybe softens the heart and opens the
Mhm.
ears to a conversation. So I think, I don't know, I found this to be really tricky where on the one hand, I don't want to minimize like the time is short and not everyone has heard about Jesus. And I know about Jesus. So if I have a chance to do it, but I've also seen so many stories of people who just felt like
Mhm.
pressured into it and like, can you just have a conversation with me without having like an agenda to
Mhm.
make this about an evangelistic conversation?
Yeah.
And so I wrestle with that all the time. Like, when am I being a coward and
Mhm.
when am I cramming it in when the time isn't right?
I think you can feel it a lot of times, and like in the nursing home, for instance, I'm a worker there. So if I start talking to someone about it and they're like, "Yeah, I don't have time for that. I'm not interested."
Mm,
Conversation done.
mm,
I mean, that's I think you can feel that. Like you said, when people are like, "Yeah," then you take a different approach. You do love. You just
yeah,
show them your love, but I do think too, I mean, faith comes from hearing the message. You
it
you
does.
can go your whole life loving people without ever telling them about Jesus,
Yeah,
you know, or
yeah,
inviting them to church or
yeah.
whatever.
At my life group a couple days ago, we had this big discussion because most of the people there are fairly new to church, and we talked about when it comes to connecting other people to the word, is it about your actions or is it about your words?
Mm,
And just hearing people's it's obviously both, but hearing
yeah,
people like which way they leaned based on their
yeah,
experiences of being fresh into it, it was so much action based that
Mhm.
Like if people led with words, but they didn't impress me with their character,
Yep.
oh man, like why would I want why would I give up an hour of my time to be like you was kind of
Right.
the conclusion. But if there was something about you that was winsome and notable, uh,
Mhm.
I think if you're about to be son-in-law, he has this
Mhm.
amazing story. What if one of his best friends just eavesdropping on Christian conversations and kind of wanted the hope that his friends had and got baptized just last year, I think it was.
Mhm. Wow,
So
that's neat.
yeah.
That's
Yeah,
awesome.
it's tough. And if you're listening, man, we get it. Like,
Mhm.
should you speak? Should you not? That just requires so much prayer and wisdom to know what to do in the right moment.
Yeah, for sure. So talk about invest, invite, and evangelize.
Yes, I love this. Pastors love kind of um. No, I forgot the word. What's the word for it?
Cheesy
No,
phrases? No,
no,
that's not
no,
it?
no. That's not
Oh,
cheesy phrases. When words start with the same sound or letter, what is it called?
alliteration?
Alliteration. Is that it? No, it's not. Is that it?
Well, one is alliteration and the other is, one
Assonance.
is
If it's
vowels and one is
this is the best part of the. This is where like all the listeners just stop listening. Do you think
eye rolls, eye rolls.
Even Pastor Shoopy is like, I'm out for this one. This you lost me. Anyway, what was your question? Invest, invite, evangelize. I've loved this little 3-word phrase. It's helped me a lot personally. Invest basically means Matthew 5:16. Let your light shine before people so they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven. So if I'm going to the soccer field, I want to do everything. I want to fight against my sinful nature and pray that the Holy Spirit makes me an above average human in that space. If you're going to your job or hanging out with friends,
Mhm.
like God, I don't want to be the same lumens as everyone else in this room. I want Jesus to make me shine a little bit brighter with a little bit more compassion or generosity or forgiveness or whatever it might be.
Right.
So investing deeply in a relationship and then inviting someone. I think of John chapter 1. Was that with Andrew? I'm trying to remember the details where he just said, "Hey, come and see."
Mhm.
Like, or maybe Nathaniel it was. I'm sorry. Where is Jesus the one? I'm not so sure about this. Hey, just come and see. And we've really seen at our church that the number one way we're seeing people getting baptized and more connected to Jesus is not I had 10 hours of conversations about Jesus with my friends. It was church people saying, "Hey, come to church and see."
Yeah.
I don't always have the words to explain this, but here's a place where it's explained well.
Mhm.
And so that's about church invitations. And then the third part, evangelize, is sometimes people have had a rough experience with church and they're not going to come. And so
Yeah.
we got to bring the gospel of Jesus to them.
Mhm.
So to me, that's just a simple way. And I think with every relationship in your life, you might be at a different step.
Mhm.
Like, have I invested in this relationship? Have I given this person an invitation? Are they open to it? If they're not, is there a way that I can bring Jesus to them, evangelize? And I think that's just a good kind of basic kind of matrix to work through as you're thinking about carrying out the Great Commission.
Statistics are overwhelmingly positive that people who are invited come, not only to church, but also to Bible studies. I have a church that I've been working with a little ways away that has this amazing story about starting this women's ministry.
Hmm.
They had me come speak at the church. They wanted to start this women's ministry. They spoke, then I spoke, and then they did one of my books as a Bible study. And they started out with 66 women and these small groups. And then these women started inviting their friends and their relatives, and over 200 women started studying. And I mean, just from women saying, "Hey, I'm in this super cool Bible study. It's
Mm,
small, it's not intimidating at all. Just
yes.
would you be interested in coming?" And women came
Wow.
just from an
Mm,
invitation, just from
yeah.
my neighbor, my coworker, my whatever, over
Mm,
200,
mm,
and they started out with 66. So it's incredible to think if you just ask somebody,
yes.
they might just come.
Yes. Yeah. I would say don't jump to the conclude. Don't say, it's almost like sales. Don't assume a no until you've heard a no.
Mhm.
So yeah, maybe your best friend isn't interested, but don't assume. Well, she probably won't want to come to church, or
Yeah,
he's probably too busy. Like ask them, ask
right.
them, and you might be surprised that if they say yes, because yeah, like you said, statistically, it's almost stunning how many people who aren't followers of Jesus say, if someone I trusted invited me to church, I'd probably go.
Mhm.
Like
And then
wow,
you know what else? The really interesting statistic is that those who come, it's like between 70 and 80% say yes. The people who come to church tell between 8 and 15 people about their experience.
Wow.
So when they come back home, they are
Mm,
telling everybody. That's how important it is.
yeah.
Most of us, when we come home from church, we tell nobody. I've gone
Mm,
to church my whole life long. Nobody wants to hear it. Well, first of all, my whole family's with me. And then,
mm.
but when you invite somebody to come to church, on average, they tell between 8 to 15 people about their experience.
Wow.
Mhm.
Wow. That's amazing.
It is
Can I
amazing.
add, can I add something real quick?
Yeah.
Um, uh, I think it's really important for Christians not to assume that certain kinds of people aren't the
Mhm.
type for
Totally
church.
agree.
Um, you might see a woman wearing a hijab and say, well, she's Muslim. She's obviously not going to be interested in Jesus. Um, has she ever heard
Mhm.
about the Jesus of the Bible? Has she ever been given the chance to understand the gospel? You might see your neighbor flying, every flag and yard sign and just think, whoa, they wouldn't fit in at my church.
Mhm.
Ha- have they ever heard why Christians value A, B, or C,
Right.
or what we think is so compelling about the ethics that Jesus taught? I had a seminary professor actually who, when he was a seminary student himself, I think he lived in an apartment, and he had some neighbors from just a different culture, and it seemed like they practiced a different religion. And I think it was during the holidays, he was like inviting some of his neighbors to come to church, and he talked about being like by their door, and the thought came into his head, they probably wouldn't come.
Mhm.
And then I remember him saying to us, wait, if God could change my heart,
Yep.
which was born hostile to him, I wasn't born like the type to follow Jesus. I was dead in my sin and blind to spiritual truth. But if the Holy Spirit could use the gospel to change me, then
Yes.
there's no one, no matter what their religious background, no matter what their morals or values, no matter how they look, how they dress, what they
Mhm.
say, how much they smoke, like none of that is more powerful than the work of the Holy Spirit through the word. So as you think about who to invest in, who to invite, who to evangelize, like don't put any asterisks on that, because Jesus didn't when he said
Mhm.
all nations, all creation, preach the gospel and make disciples.
Amen. So good. Now, are some people just better at this than others? You have
Yeah.
to be an extrovert?
um, I am amazed. So there's this young woman at our church. Uh, I know 100 times more about the Bible than she does, easily. I'm not sure that she could tell you what Habakkuk is or who it is or where it is. But she, in my 10 years as her pastor, has invited more people to hear about Jesus than I personally have.
Mhm.
Um, and it just reminds me, if you think like you have to have a certain personality type, like being an extrovert, or you have to have a certain knowledge of the Bible, um, like that is simply not. In fact, what I've actually learned is that people tend to talk about their spiritual questions with people who are approachable, not with those who are knowledgeable.
Yep.
So I'm more knowledgeable than her, but she has such a warm personality and she's such a faithful friend that she's so approachable. And it is just beautiful to me, the people who are connected in like the spider web network that she has been.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
so I think some people are better at leadership than others. I think that some people have the gift of an evangelist. I think that's biblical and some don't. But all of us in our own way can tell one, two, five, 10, or like her, 100 people to come and learn more about Jesus Christ.
I love too how you said in this message that you had talked to, I don't know if it was 2 or 3 people who had really brought a lot of people to
Mhm.
church over their lifetime, and they all kinda said the same thing, like, "I don't feel particularly good at this. I
Yes.
and I
Yes.
don't and I don't know the answer to a lot of questions.
Mm,
I just ask.
mm,
I just ask them to come. I
yeah.
just talk to them."
Yeah.
And again, that comes back to, if you don't invite them, who's going to?
Yep.
And if you don't wanna invite them to church, like you said, some people have been hurt by church, some people aren't gonna step into a church, but if you would invite them to your life group, or
Mhm,
if you would invite them to coffee and just talk about it, or say, "I've been reading this book. It
mhm,
is amazing, and I don't know, are you interested?" I
yeah.
mean, just open the conversation up.
Yeah. Have you heard of this media ministry called Time of Grace? Are you
No,
familiar?
never. Mm-mm. Is it good?
Shameless plug. I think it's really cool in the age that we live in that there are such easy ways to share Jesus with people who are a little bit wounded.
Mhm.
I see people who say, I've been watching Time of Grace on TV for years,
Yeah,
and now I'm finally ready to take a step.
right.
If you have a friend whose guard is up, just share the podcast and say, hey, I know you've had a rough road with church and stuff, but this has
Mhm,
been valuable to me. Maybe you want to listen. And you might be surprised that they subscribe to the podcast and
mhm.
listen more than you think. So I think that's really cool. We might invite them to a physical church, or we might evangelize through a resource like the ones we try to produce at Time of Grace that can be easily shareable with people who don't know Jesus just yet.
I totally agree, and I have friends who are in that predicament. I have a friend that I know very well who hasn't set foot in a church for quite a while, but she listens all the time.
Mhm.
She
Yeah,
listens, so, yeah, she's
that's awesome.
getting it.
That's awesome.
Sermon number 3,
Hey,
reset. What? Oh,
no,
we're
I was saying, hey, yes, this is my favorite one. I was just excited about it. My bad. I
okay,
didn't mean to
okay,
interrupt you.
good.
Keep
It's
going. Keep
like
going.
me and Phil Wickham. Yay, woo! All right, sermon 3, reset to find your place. What is the great question that we all have?
Who are you really?
Mhm,
Man, there's a whole bunch of regrets I have as a Christian, like wisdom that I've come to decades down the road that I just wish I could jump in a time machine and tell the 12-year-old version of Mike.
yeah,
And this is such a personal message for me about finding out who I am and who I'm not.
yeah,
To ditch that assumption that anyone could do what I do and I can do anything that everyone else does. That's just not it's not biblical, and it's actually very unhelpful. And figuring out exactly who God made you to be, the Bible would say, what's your part in the body of
mhm,
Christ? Which member are you in this body that God has put together? Man, for me, I'm loving ministry so much right now, in part, I think, because I finally figured that out
yeah,
and I can communicate to people like, here's what I do really well, and here's what I don't. Here's where I need you because I'm terrible at this. Like,
mhm.
just figuring out those questions, who am I, is such a game changer and such a reset for our faith.
Totally agree. I wish, and like you said, you came to it maybe later than you would have liked, and I wish more people understood this. So I'm really glad that you're addressing it, and so that hopefully people can realize this.
Yeah.
So what is a spiritual gift, and how can I be sure that I have one or maybe more than one?
Mhm.
How do I know?
Yeah. So my unofficial definition of a spiritual gift is uh, God given above averageness. That makes sense.
Yep.
It's like when I'm comparing myself, there are just some things that I am better than most people at.
Mhm.
I'm not saying I'm the best at it. I'm not saying I'm the only one who can do it. But I am saying if you line up 100 humans in the room, that I'm closer to one end of the line than the other.
Mhm.
And I can't boast about it. I can't brag about it. I might have worked on it, but that innate like gift, it
Mhm.
comes from God. And
Yep.
that's what I think a spiritual gifting is. For me, I didn't know this. I can actually remember being in middle school. I have this odd memory. We were in choir class and we had to take a test where all the notes were on the staff. And
Ugh.
is this a C? Is this a D? Is this an F? And Amber, I'm not super duper musical, but I was so motivated and I could do that so fast. It was almost unbelievable to my teacher. Like C D E F G, like I could crank it out, not because I'm like a musical savant, but because my brain can just process and read things fast. I'm
Mhm.
like one of the fastest readers and test. I can just like absorb information and pour it out in a way that before, if you would have said, given me a compliment on that, I would have said, "Oh, it's nothing.
Yeah, everybody can do that, right?
Anyone could do
Yeah.
anyone could be this
No.
compassionate. Anyone could figure out this
Mhm.
sticky problem." And we just don't realize, like, when people compliment us, it's because they see an above averageness.
Mhm.
They see something that they couldn't do quite that same way. And so I think, it can be dangerous to compare yourself to other people. But if things just like come naturally to you and you tend to be a little bit better than the people in the room, You
Mhm.
might be looking at one of the amazing spiritual gifts that God has given specifically to you.
True story. I bet this is gonna come as a huge shock to you, but worship is one of my spiritual gifts. And
What?
also, true story, I do not have a great voice, and I do not play a musical instrument. However, I love to worship.
Mm,
I have worship music on probably way more than most people do. I just love to worship. So maybe you should talk about what are some of the spiritual gifts, because if people haven't heard this before,
mm,
they might not know, what should I be looking to compare myself to?
mm.
Like, what are some of them?
Yeah, good question. There's no exhaustive list in the Bible. There's 4 key sections that talk about this: Romans 12, 1 Corinthians 12, Ephesians 4, and 1 Peter 4. And those lists have things like teaching. Some people just have a way of explaining things that's
Mhm.
concise and simple. And people who don't know the answer say, "Oh, I get it."
Yep.
Where other people try to explain it, and you're like, "Well, you're using English words, but no,
Right.
you didn't answer my question." There's the gift of leadership. Some people have a way of saying, "Okay, here's the problem. I think here's the solution. Here's the direction we're going, and here's the steps to get there."
Mhm.
Where other people like, nope, no one follows me because I don't know where we're going.
Yep.
There's gifts of empathy, compassion, and service. Um, it's kind of funny. Literally, as we're talking, my mom just walked past the window of my office, and my mom is like the most insanely gifted servant of Jesus.
Mhm.
She will humble herself and sew your wedding dress. She will bake cookies. She will be there at 6 a.m. to get the coffee ready for a church. In fact, isn't my mom like doing your daughter's wedding dress?
She is, and not
Yeah.
only that, but the first time I met your mom, she was ironing all the tablecloths for an Advent by candlelight. This was like a year ago. She was standing in a room ironing, and I'm like, "So who are you?" "I'm Pastor Mike's wife." I'm like, "Uh-huh, so you get the ironing duty. Like, how do you get out of ironing duty? That sounds miserable." She's like, "I don't mind it at all. I just."
Ooh, Amber, that's the second time we brought up kind of a big day that maybe everyone who's listening doesn't know about. So what's coming up here in your life?
Yeah, January 4th, my daughter, my oldest, is getting married to a young man who I met at your church, actually. No
That's
thanks, by the way, to you. I did try to get your help, and you absolutely refused to help me at all, so I had to go there and do it myself. Thank you very much. It did work.
Oh, matchmaking isn't my spiritual gift. Can I say
I
that?
know, that's what you said. That's what you said. I was texting you and our producer, "Hey, any young eligible men at the core, that's a huge church, there's gotta be some good godly men there," and you said, "I'm gonna excuse myself from this conversation."
Is that how you read my text? That was the
And then I
tone?
said, "Look, Eliezer wasn't a matchmaker either, but he still did the job for Abraham, so buck up, buddy, and give me some names," which you didn't, but thankfully, I came to the core to work one day, and there was a very attractive young man who's also godly, who I met, and I said, and I quote, "Hi, are you single and available?" And my son said to me later, "Mom, he thought you were a creep, like, you're old. How dare you go up to a young 20-something guy and say, 'Are you single and available?'" He was probably like, "I am running out of here as fast as possible." And then I said, "Would you like to marry my daughter?" And apparently the answer is yes, because he is.
Wow. God works in mysterious ways. Full
Yes, with or
stop.
without the people we work with. I'm not bitter at all. Not at all. It's not your spiritual gift. So it's all good.
Hmm.
You're speechless. This is a first. Pastor Mike is speechless.
I just want I'm now I'm curious every time I text you, I'm gonna like hear you reading my text in the tone that you just use. I'm excusing myself from this conversation.
Yes, so we are having a wedding at the core at your church
Oh,
in just a
thank
couple of weeks. By the time this airs, it will be days away. So
awesome.
exciting.
Yeah, so it could be like a big-hearted thing. It could be a boldness and leadership thing. It could be a wisdom and strategy thing. It talks about the gift of generosity, just if like giving is an instinct to you. There's the gift of an evangelist. There's so many different things that are listed in the Bible. But I would just kind of come back to that big idea. Like, is there something about the way that you think, the way that you work, that's just unique and there's some really beautiful strengths to it. And I think that's your
Mhm.
God-given gift.
Nice. Okay, good. So a lot of people struggle to know who they are and where they belong. How can someone figure out what their gifting is other than comparing? You told us to compare
Hmm.
and what they should be doing with it.
These are man-made tools, but I personally, what really opened my eyes to this was taking some of those personality tests.
Mhm.
Some of my favorites are the Strengths Finder, Clifton Strengths Analysis, and then the 6 types of working genius. I know we use those at my church and at Time of Grace as well. And honestly, after I took that, oh my goodness, so many things in my life made sense. For example, I learned that one of the things I'm worst at on the list of possible strengths is really nuanced, like deep thinking, deliberative decision making.
Wow.
And I kind of thought back, like, wow, there's so many times in my life where I have just struggled, like driving the speed limit. Um, I used to drive with the flow of traffic like everyone else. I had a college professor who said the word limit means limit. And so I did it. I would like drive in the left lane of the interstate, cruise control, locked in the speed limit, because that's what you're supposed to do. I
There's
I
a
used to
difference between driving the speed limit and policing everyone else.
very true, but I just didn't realize that like my brain was so black and white.
Yeah.
I used to listen to a certain kind of music and then I thought, no, this is wrong. And I smashed my whole CD collection with a hammer when I was in high school.
Okay.
And now I'm older. I'm like, well, you know what? There's more. Christian media isn't that black and white. It's like you can only listen if it has the name Jesus in it. Um, I just didn't realize there's things that I'm really below average at,
Mhm.
like complexity and nuance. And then there's things I'm really above average at. I mean, I meet people and tell them I read, a book or two a week, and they say, "What? Why? How?" And I say, "Because it's fun. What do you do?" So, taking those tests, and then I think just like stepping back and thinking about your life. Where have you excelled? Where have you struggled? Where have people been impressed by you? Where have they gotten frustrated with you?
Mhm.
I don't think these personality tests are like the be end end all, and they're not, directly from the Bible, but they can be really, really helpful conversation starters. Like you're answering these questions, and it's kind of like helping you see yourself in a little bit of a clearer mirror.
Yeah.
So I think I'd start there. Would be my first advice.
And I should mention too that our colleague, Dr. Bruce Becker, wrote a book, Gifted for More, and he
Yeah.
talked about the spiritual gifts. He broke them down, and then he has a really good spiritual gift inventory in the back,
Yes.
which
Yes.
we'll
Yes.
break it down to. It's super simple. It takes maybe 15 minutes or so. And like you said, it's not an exact science, but it can really point you in the right direction.
Yeah.
Like I said, I didn't even realize worship was a spiritual gift. And
Mhm.
then when I took it and I was like, yes, of course worship is one of my spiritual gifts. Not that I can lead it, but man, I'll sing along. So,
Man, you know where this super benefited me too was in my marriage.
mm,
Kim and I took the test. I'm talking about the Strengths Finder in this case.
yep.
And I just looked at her results and I said, "Oh my goodness. This is why we fight. This explains every fight we've ever had." Like it was so eye-opening to me of like these weird expectations I had of how we were going to interact because I loved her and I was committed to her, but there were just things I don't know, I just thought she was just being weird about certain things.
Mhm.
And it was no, it's because she's wired like this and not like that. And if I kind of expected like any given day she was going to morph into whatever, she wanted to be, or I like
Yeah.
that's just not how we work. And
Mhm.
so, man, that was such to this day, for example, the gift of communication is really high on my list. And for Kim, it's dead last.
Wow.
So a quick way with words. So imagine it. We get into a disagreement about something. I'm like, point A, B, C, D, E, subpoint 111 under point two. And Kim is like still thinking of what's the first thing she wants to say.
Yeah.
And she's feeling overwhelmed by my fire hose of words. And I'm getting frustrated. Like, what do you think? Say something.
Yeah.
And now I realize, like, oh my goodness, I have to bring up an issue with her and give her some time and space to think.
Mhm.
And when she opens her mouth, she's not going to need 1,000 words. She's going to need 10. And it's going to be right to the point, and it's going to be beautiful, and it's going to be true. But if I try to make her communicate like I communicate, it's going to blow up every time. So yes, man, sorry to go on about this, but just gifting who we are and who we
Mhm.
aren't. I've just seen as a pastor, as a husband, as a person. There's just so much benefit in answering this big question.
Mm. I think it's Clifton Strengths. Is it the Clifton Strengths that's like 32? You can get 32,
34. Yep.
34, whatever. Okay, so did you know that over time the priorities, the numbering change? So like your you'll always have those same 34, but they will change order. And I didn't realize this. In fact, when my friends told me this not too long ago, I'm embarrassed to say, because I had taken the test in 2017. I had a lot happen fairly traumatically in my life between then and 2023. And my top 10 are significantly different. I mean,
Mhm.
very, very different. I'm now relater in terms of like, I don't talk to people about my life. Like two or
Mm.
three people, know me. And then everybody else, you get the general blah, blah, blah. And
Mm.
so my friends were like, "Well, Amber, you're always the same 34." And I'm like, "I don't think I am." Like, I think so I got out one night the list. Sure enough, they are the same 34, but very drastically different order.
Wow.
So it's kind of fun to take it maybe if it's been
Yeah.
10 or 15 years and see where your top 10 are now compared
Yeah.
to where they might have been before.
Interesting. Wow.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Okay. So why is it important to focus on our strengths rather than our weaknesses?
Oh yeah, I can keep this one brief. It's good for God, it's good for others, and it's good for you.
Mhm. Some
So
people would say though that, if I'm really deficient in this, I should probably really work on that and get better.
yeah, I think that breaks the visual of the Bible that we're like parts of the body.
Mhm.
So if I got mad at my nose, you're so bad at seeing things. Come on, 2025 is going to be the year of you seeing through those nostrils. You got two holes like you got two eye sockets. You can do it. Let's play the Rocky soundtrack and get at it. And I'm, obviously that's not 1,000% true. We can improve on things, but
You're absolutely right. No,
I
you're
don't
right.
think I'm going to snap my fingers and become the most adaptable person ever because I'm a super structured person.
Mhm.
And I'd rather lean into the strengths of being a structured person than trying to be structured and adaptable at the same time. I just don't think that's realistic.
Nice.
No.
Why do some of us need to tone down our gifts just a wee bit?
Just a wee bit. I sometimes describe spiritual gifts or talents or strengths like a really beautiful song on the radio. So there's a lot of different songs, there's a lot of different genres, there's a lot of different stations, and a lot of them can be amazingly good music. But if you take any song on the radio and crank it up too high, it can be not pleasant but painful.
Mhm.
And to me, that's just a great description of these things. I might have a way with words, but if I dominate conversation because I'm talking too much, my strength has become a bad thing and not a good thing. You might be super empathetic, but if my mom, for example, says yes to everyone who asks her to sew a wedding dress, she's not going to have time to take care of herself, to come home and focus on Jesus. You might be a great leader, but like if you're always stepping into that instead of letting other people lead because you just instinctively know what to do.
Mhm.
So I think we always have to be cautious. There's some really good tools out there that'll tell you like when you're a bit too much, here's what it looks like. And
Hmm.
so you can become a little bit self-aware of, okay, I want my strength to be just right. I want the volume of
Yeah.
this station that God has given me as a personality to be pleasant and clear, but not overwhelming and painful.
It's beautiful. I think that's so important too. I think that's a rookie mistake that a lot of us made,
Yeah.
maybe still continue to make, but truthfully, you
Yeah.
know, younger me was very much like, "I'm going in and we're gonna change everything."
Yeah. Yeah.
And you kind of destroy a lot of people along the way if you're not, you know, watching other people and seeing
Yep.
what would work and
Yeah. Do you think it's fair to say, are there like 3 stages of this? Maybe we start kind of ignorant of our gifts and other gifts. So we got to move to the next stage where like, okay, this is who I am and this is who I'm not. And then maybe the most mature stage is like, okay, just because I'm not that doesn't mean I can
Mhm.
excuse a sin. And just because I am this doesn't mean I don't need to be aware of its excesses.
Mhm.
And that we end up being kind of these well-rounded, like parts of the body that are being used in the right way at the right
Mhm.
time and in the right amount.
Yeah, I think that's beautiful, and I think it's also beautiful when churches come alongside people and really help them
Mm,
and provide mentorship so
mm,
that because a lot of times we don't understand that we need to tone it down a little bit, And
Yeah.
when we have a wise, mature person coming alongside us who is like, you are doing so great.
Mm.
And
And
you could tone it down just a wee bit so the rest of us don't get blown away.
yeah,
So I think if I think that's a really important thing for churches to do.
yeah.
Come alongside people.
That's a good word. In Christianity, maybe it's just me living here in the Midwest, but there's this kind of Midwest niceness
Mhm.
that sometimes we don't give each other that candid feedback,
Hmm.
that you almost have to be more direct as a Christian to say, "Hey, what's it like working with me?
Mhm.
What's it like being in group with me? What's it like being married to me?" And like, "Hey, maybe give me one thing or two things that you think I'm doing well. I want to celebrate that, and give me one thing I could be better at in this year to come."
Yep.
I think that's a great reset question. It gives people permission to like not keep it inside and get frustrated and
Yep.
bitter over that part if you don't see it just yet.
Mhm.
And that's really one of the beautiful ways that God helps us to grow. So,
Mhm.
yeah, I think you're spot on.
About 5 years ago, I started praying for really mature Christian friends who could hold me accountable and
Mm,
not just tell me, "Hey, you're doing really great." I
yeah.
needed the friends that were like, you know what I'd probably do if I were you? I might,
Mm,
maybe not say that or not say it like that," or
mm,
those friends make all the difference.
yeah.
They
Yeah.
will help you grow in so many ways.
Yeah. Wow. Well, Amber, it's been an awesome conversation. We talked about the big priorities of seeking God first, even if you have to say no to some things. We talked about the purpose of the Great Commission: invest, invite, evangelize, which is not cheesy. It's a great way to remember our evangelistic calling. And we talked about our place. What's the spiritual gift that God has given us? How do we use that well to his glory and for others' good? So thanks for talking through. Brand new year, big reset button. We also have a great resource we want to share with you today. It's a brand new book by Pastor Matt Ewart. It's called Unshakable. I actually had a chance to get my hands on a copy early. I've read it cover to cover. And wow, it's a solid book about finding our greatest worth and identity in what Jesus says about us instead of what we do.
Mhm.
And I think with this kind of sermon series, it's a great fit. There's always the temptation to think that I'm defined by, am I prioritizing God? Have I shared my faith? Am I using the gift that God has given? And those are important things, but wow, they're definitely not the most important thing. And this book is going to get you back to the thing that matters most, that God accepts you because of the work of his son, Jesus. So make sure you go to timeofgrace.org, look up Unshakable, our brand new book by Pastor Matt Ewart. All right, Amber, what a great conversation today. Thanks for making some time for our friends and for me. Any closing thoughts before we launch people into a brand new year?
Happy New Year.
Yes, God bless you as you do, and we'll catch you next time.